Hey church family, Annie Neufeld here with your weekly small groups video. This past weekend we continued in our series called True Story, Encounters with Jesus in Our Everyday Life, and we heard from Beth Paz, our director of college and young adults. She preached on Hosea 6 verses 1 through 3, and in this passage we hear from Hosea, a messenger from God who speaks to God's people on God's behalf. God had chosen the people of Israel to be his representative, to reveal his love and his ways to the world around them, but they have disobeyed. They have rebelled, they have not lived in God's wisdom, and they have reaped those natural consequences and have experienced God's judgment. And so the prophet here is reminding people of God's love and his ways and calling God's people back to remember the vulnerable, to care for their neighbors, to love one another with justice and mercy. So here we have in chapter 6 words of repentance and hope for the people of Israel. God has judged them, but they are being healed. God is binding up their wounds and redeeming their story. He is doing a new thing. Pastor Beth's title for this sermon was A 3-Day Story. It comes from verse 2 of Hosea 6, where the people say, after 2 days he will revive us. On the 3rd day, he will restore us, that we may live in his presence. And Pastor Beth said that in the same way, we are living in a 3-day story. Day 1 is a season of grief or despair, sadness or depression that we're in. Day 2, though, is a season of waiting, where we're not yet healed, but we're not in the pit anymore. We're living in an in-between time. And day 3 is the dawn of a new day where we see redemption really come into our stories. And Beth said, if you are in day 1, in that season of grief, we need people who will sit with us in the pit, who will sit with us in despair, who won't demand that we're something that we're not, that we clean ourselves up, but who will just be with us. If you're on day 2, in the perseverance, we need people who will lament, who will point to the Lord, acknowledge the Lord, but be still in the waiting. And if you're in the new day, a day of a redeemed story, we have to proclaim hope. Show the scars of where you've been and how God met us in the pit. So church, this week, I want to invite us to reflect on our own life, on your own 3-day story. Which of those seasons do you think that you are in right now? Maybe you're in day 1 in that season of grief. You're suffering real loss. Maybe you're in day 2. You're in a season of waiting. You're in an in-between. Maybe it's day 3 and you've really seen God redeem parts of your story in your life. What is God's hope for you then too in this season? What does God's hope look like in the despair or in the waiting? Or in the dawn of a new day? One of my favorite things that Pastor Beth said to us was, you are welcome here to be wherever you're at in your story. We don't demand people to be nice and clean and shiny before they come to church. We meet each other in the pit and in the perseverance and in the promise, and we find Jesus together. So, this week, church, may you find your pit people, the people who are with you in the muck and the mire, who sit with you when you are a snotty mess of tears. May you find your perseverance people, the people who will lament with you and wait with you and who won't get impatient, but who will continue to point to the Lord. And may you find your promised land people, the people who will rejoice with you at the redemption God has brought into your life and into your story. Go in peace.